The Russian Ministry of Defense has accused Ukraine of allegedly developing a biological weapons program assisted by the US. A spokesman claimed Russian forces had apparently discovered documents concerning the urgent destruction of all traces of the project.
During the special military operation, we discovered evidence of the Kiev regime's urgent destruction of traces of a military biological program implemented in Ukraine and funded by the U.S. Department of Defense. We have received documentation from employees of Ukrainian biological laboratories concerning the urgent destruction on February 24th of highly dangerous pathogens of plague, anthrax, tularemia, cholera and other deadly diseases on February 24th.
Well, we've been hearing from the spokesperson for the Russian Ministry of Defense saying that while they were conducting their operations in Ukraine, they came across evidence that proves that there was a biological program being conducted in Ukraine with the assistance of the American Department of Defense. Now, among the evidence they found is a whole cache of documents that they're currently reviewing and they are analyzing and will release in the nearest future. But what we understand amongst those documents is confirmation that these Ukrainian biochemical laboratories that were close to Russian territory were involved in this biological program. And apparently we're talking here about pathogens of plague, anthrax, tularemia, cholera, and other deadly diseases. At the same time, there seems to have been a major panic when the Russian operation started in Ukraine because there are documents that are dated February the 24th that call for the immediate destruction of any kind of stockpiles or any kind of evidence that pinpoints and shows that this was happening. Now, we know that obviously when the Russian military operation started, there would have been panic in the Pentagon to try and hide any kind of evidence. And one of the documents that has already been released by the Russian Ministry of Defense comes from the Ukrainian Health Ministry, and it explicitly calls on all kinds of biological laboratories in Ukraine to immediately get rid of any kind of evidence that they have. So this is the document. And before we take a look at it, let me mention that the United States has so far not given any kind of response.
The Health Ministry of Ukraine, due to the martial law that was implemented on February 24, 2022, according to the President's decree, requests to ensure the emergency destruction of biological pathogenic agents that are used to provide control systems for laboratory research.
Well, it's in blatant violation of international law, and more specifically, it is in violation of Article 1 of the UN Convention on the Prohibition of Biological and Toxic Weapons. Now, already back after the First World War, there was signed into law the banning of these kind of weapons because the First World War did show just how deadly they can be. And this was then reinforced with further bannings in 1972 and 1993. And what those specifically prohibited was the transfer, the manufacturing, and the development and stockpiling of such weapons. What we do know, of course, is that diseases caused by these type of weapons are deadly, and they are not limited to national borders. So you're talking about here something that has an impact on the international community. So certainly it would be a situation where both Washington and Kiev would be in violation of international law.
According to Reuters, the United States on Wednesday denied renewed Russian accusations that Washington was operating biowarfare labs in Ukraine, calling the claims laughable and suggesting Moscow may be laying the groundwork to use a chemical or biological weapon. Late on Tuesday, Russia repeated its accusation of several years that the United States is working with Ukrainian laboratories to develop biological weapons. Such assertions in Russian media increased in the run-up to Moscow's military move in Ukraine and were made as recently as Wednesday by Foreign Ministry spokesman Maria Zakharova. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said on Wednesday that the Russian accusations are absurd on their face, and in the words of my Irish Catholic grandmother, a bunch of malarkey. There's nothing to it. It's classic Russian propaganda. In a statement also released on Wednesday, State Department spokesman Ned Price said Russia is inventing false pretexts in an attempt to justify its own horrific actions in the Ukraine. And White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki cited what she called Russia's false claims on Twitter. She wrote, "It's Russia that has a long and well-documented track record of using chemical weapons, including in attempted assassinations and poisoning of Putin's political enemies like Alexei Navalny." Russia has always denied carrying out an attack on Navalny, let alone use a chemical weapon on him. However, in an article dated October 4th of 2018 through TASS Media, which is a Russian news agency, it was Russian Defense Ministry led by Major General Igor Kirillov, in which he was expecting answers from the United States and Georgia on why toxic agents and biological weapons were being stored at the Richard Lugar Public Health Research Center. According to Kirillov, ministry experts have studied materials published by former Georgian State Security Minister Igor Gyandalidze on U.S. activities at the Richard Lugar Public Health Center, located in the Georgian settlement of Alexeyeva outside of Tbilisi. He said that a number of patents, including various types of munitions intended for delivering chemical and biological agents. Kirillov demanded, it brings to fore the question, why are such documents being stored at the Lugar Public Health Research Center? We expect a clear-cut answer to the question from the Georgian and American sides. The general also said that the description of munitions included such characteristics as the low destruction cost and the absence of the need to contact with enemy manpower. This corresponds to the concept of non-contact warfare. These patents indicate a possibility to stuff capsules with poisonous radioactive narcotic substances, as well with infectious disease pathogens. The United States is very likely to have tested a toxic drug or highly lethal biological agent at the Lugar Center in Georgia under the guise of medical research. The Russian general highlighted the deaths of patients at the patents at the Lugar Center, where medicine under the Soviet brand in the documents have been tested. Kirillov noted that the US-based Gilead Sciences, in which former US Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld is a key shareholder, manufactured the drug. The general went on to say, in fact, the simultaneous death of a large number of volunteers is reason to believe that a highly toxic chemical drug or a highly lethal biological agent was assessed under the guise of medical treatment at the Lugar Center. Despite the deaths of 24 patients in December 2015 alone, when the Sovaldi drug was tested, the clinical research was continued in violation of international standards and contrary to the patient's wishes, which led to an additional death, 49 more people. Now, this is not the first time the United States or Russia have conducted biological warfare or biological testing. Now, one of the more nefarious operations was Unit 731, which was a covert biological and chemical warfare research development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army that engaged in lethal human experimentation during the Second Sino-Japanese War between 1937 to 1945, World War II. It was responsible for some of the most notorious war crimes committed by the armed forces of Imperial Japan. The unit was commanded by General Shiro Ishii, a combat medical officer in the Kwangtung Army. One of the leading experts in this story is Jeffrey Kay, in which he conducted a great article, which I'm going to provide at the bottom of the description box. The Unit 71 military campaign, where 700,000 people, mostly Chinese civilians, were victimized. One such instance, in October of 1940, the Japanese dropped paper bags filled with plague-infested fleas over the cities of Ningbo and Kuzhong in Zhejiang province. Other attacks involved contaminating wells and distributing poisoned foods. during the height, well, after World War II, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the United States in this. After the surrender of Nazi Germany, the United States, under its Operation Paperclip, which the United States basically gave, which would, by the way, which was a secret intelligence program that involved 1,600, approximately 1,600 Nazi German scientists, engineers, and technicians. And they were given a blank sheet in regards to their crimes, or their alleged crimes, and given employment inside the United States. And this operation lasted between 1945 and 1959, in which it was conducted by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency and largely carried out by the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps. Many of these people were former leaders of the Nazi Party. Large numbers of German scientists began to be discovered in late April of 1949. And the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff established the first secret recruitment program, which was actually called Operation Overcast, on July 20, 1945, to assist in shortening the Japanese war and to aid post-war military research. Knowing that Unit 731 was a bioweapons lab, the United States wanted to counteract it as well. To counteract it in the future regarding Russia and during the Cold War, which I'm going to talk about, in which the bioweapons program in the Soviet Union and the United States flourished in the anxious climate of the Cold War. Now, the United States expedited their program due to the fact that they got most of their research and findings from the German scientists through Operation Paperclip. And both nations explored the use of dozens of different bacteria, viruses, and other biological toxins. They also devised sophisticated ways to disperse these agents in fine mist aerosols and to package them even in bombs or to even launch them on missiles. But by the end of 1969, President Richard Nixon terminated the offensive biological warfare program and ordered all stockpile weapons destroyed. And in 1972, the US and more than 100 nations signed the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. However, the United States Central Intelligence Agency and the US Army's biological weapons program continued to operate in secret, as well as Fort Detrick, Maryland. And of course, one can't forget the anthrax letters of 2001 in the weeks following the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, in which there were reports that anthrax-laced letters have been sent to 5 media outlets, including 2 U.S. senators who opposed the war in Iraq, Senators Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy, in which 5 people died from the inhaled form of the disease, and hundreds of millions were struck by anxiety on top of their paranoia regarding the terrorist attacks 2 weeks prior. Yet in the months and years that followed, there were no subsequent attacks. And the FBI's resolution of the case in 2008 suggested that the anthrax letters were intended more to prompt fear rather than kill. The FBI's forensic investigation relied heavily on comparative genomics and pinpointed the source of the anthrax, which was a flask in the lab of the U.S. Army scientist Bruce Ivins. Now, Bruce Ivins was a U.S. Army scientist tasked at Fort Detrick, in which the FBI basically exclaimed that he was the one who sent the anthrax letters. However, it has now come to light through recent reports and through the Inspector General report that Ivins basically had no evidence, well, the FBI had no evidence that Ivins was the guilty party. And through the intense pressure from the Department of Justice, headed by Director Robert Mueller, Ivins killed himself, in which the investigation also died along with it. But the strain of anthrax was traced back to the Ames strain vial, which was stored in Ames, Iowa. Due to the intense pressure from the public, the FBI was ordered to destroy from their superiors, as well as the managers at Ames, Iowa, to destroy the entire database of the Ames strain, which is exactly the strain of anthrax, named after the research facility in Ames, Iowa. So why did the FBI do this? Well, it's most likely that the strain itself was released intentionally so that we can invade Iraq. During the war with Iran in 1980, Saddam Hussein had launched a bioweapons program, but lacked the expertise to develop sophisticated arms. Now, it was alleged that Saddam Hussein was known to have unleashed chemical weapons on Kurdish civilians and the Iranians in the 1980s. However, President Reagan allowed Iraq, by looking the other way, to conduct a biological weapons war, which is in direct violations of international law. By April of 1991, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 687, which required Iraq to destroy all of its chemical, nuclear, and biological weapons. And of course, 9/11 happens, and what happens? The United States Central Intelligence Agency suggests that Al-Qaeda was cooperating with Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist army in producing biological and chemical weapons. It is now clear that soon after the passage of Resolution 687 in 1991, Iraq had destroyed all of their munitions and stockpiles of biological weapons. So then why did we invade in 2003 when there's absolutely no evidence that Iraq had any biological weapons or anthrax? So now, who do we believe? Do we believe Russia? Do we believe the United States? We are left in a paralyzing position. The United States is claiming that Russia is going to produce biological and chemical weapons to be used either in Ukraine or even in the United States. Russia claims that the United States, through its biological weapons labs found in Georgia, in Russia, and in 30 known biological weapons labs, where over 200 more are unknown locations and remain classified, claimed that the United States are the ones who are producing biological and chemical weapons. We are left with a paralyzing question. Who do we believe?